Hello friends, this is Lauren Taylor from Lauren Taylor Made, and I'm so excited to be here on the Crafty Meraki YouTube channel as a guest for the countdown to Christmas. It is the 14th, which means there are 11 days until Christmas, and I'm creating a card with some very fun and festive products. In fact, the first one is called the Festive Frolic stamp set, and I have the coordinating die as well as the Jade Shadows Dewdrops, Sapphire Night Dewdrops, Matte Gold Opal Gems, and I'm going to be bringing in a couple other products that are not necessarily for Christmas, but can be easily used with this collection of products I have here. I've already stamped, colored, and die cut my images from the Festive Frolic stamp set. I love that you can also do the EAPs if you don't like coloring and cut those out. I did use the dewdrops and the matte opal gems as inspiration for my color choices. I'm bringing in the Speckled Canopy background A2 cover plate die as well as my Hugs, the Meraki Moments Hugs hot foil and coordinating die. I'm going to use that as my sentiment for today's card. So I'm going to go ahead and jump in. Like I said, I've already stamped, colored, and die cut my images. If you don't like coloring, you can definitely get the artist papers and be able to cut those images out. But I'm going to start with foiling. So off camera, I do have my Glimmer Hot Foil machine getting ready and warmed up. So I'm going to trim down some matte gold Glimmer Hot Foil, which I thought coordinated pretty well with the matte gold opal gems. I mean, they share the same name, so pretty close. And I'm just using my little trimmer here to trim a piece of foil that will fit around the Hugs plate sentiment. So I will also be grabbing a piece of white paper, and I'm going to be using that to foil my sentiment on. I will be using a paper much larger than I need, but that's because I want to make sure that my Hugs sentiment I'm not going to like misplace it or miscenter it. I wanted a larger piece than what I needed, and I will trim it down after. Also, side note, don't drop your foil onto double-sided adhesive. Luckily, I was able to peel it up and it did not affect where my cover plate or my plate was going to go. So it foiled just fine. You can see here that I foiled it again, kind of in the middle of this large piece of white cardstock. And I'm going to set that aside and bring out the other half of the sheet of that white cardstock. And I'm going to do a little bit of ink blending before I die cut it out with that background A2 plate die. So I grabbed some colors. Again, I'm being very inspired by my dewdrops. So I picked Villainous Potion and Pine Needle Distress Oxide from Ranger Ink. And I'm going to use some blending brushes to apply this color to my white cardstock. So I'm going to start with Villainous Potion and just blending it from the edges. And I'm going to go about halfway up the paper. I will end up adding much more purple. So I did about half of the half sheet with that purple ink, and then I brought in the pine needles and I'm going to blend that up from the other way. I want the pine needles in my background to look kind of like the ground of the scene that I'm going to build, and the purple will be more of the background or wall or however you want to imagine this card. Just the green is going to be a bit more towards the ground part of my background. So as you can see, I need a lot more purple. So I'll go ahead and bring that and blend that on as well. I am not going to worry too much about it looking perfectly seamless blend because I will die cut it out and I'm going to decorate on it with some of my images. So as long as the blend between the purple and green look pretty good, I am happy with it. I'm also going to grab my distress sprayer and just add a couple sprays just to give the background some texture. Again, that also kind of helps if your blend isn't, perfect. Adding some water droplets is a fun way to just give it more texture. I did clean up the excess ink and I'm going to bring out some Starry Colors watercolor, and I'm going to use the light gold color. So adding some water to that little palette. And I'm going to bring out two paintbrushes, one to actually do my splatter and the other one to be what I tap my paintbrush on in order to get that splatter onto the background. So I'm just going to keep going with these light splatters and completely cover the panel and let that dry while I clean up my mess. Once it's dry, I'll go ahead and grab that speckled canopy background cover plate and run that through my die cutting machine. I'm going to try to pick up my mess a bit while it's running through my machine. I did poke out all of the little details from the die. I really love how this background just kind of just adds a fun dimension and texture to the card. A great way to busy up what would be kind of a plain or boring's a harsh word, but not as exciting background. So now I want to trim that white panel with my Hugs sentiment so that way I could use it behind the die cut panel. So I'm just going to trim down the panel, making sure my sentiment looks straight and centered. And I trimmed around all four sides so that way it was A2 in size when I was done. I do wish like I made it a little bit higher up and a little bit more to the right, but it turns out great. I love how my card turns out, but if I could change that, I would put my sentiment a little higher and a little more centered towards the right. So once I have that done, I'm actually going to die cut the shadow Hugs sentiment from my die cut cover plate design. So I can see the sentiment through the holes in the design, but I'm going to just do my best to get it lined up. I'm sure there is probably an easier way to do this, but I thought this was fine. I can see the sentiment through the holes. So I just lined it up so my sentiment would be centered. If I were to cut through this cover plate, you can see the sentiment through the design, which you'll see right here. I'm going to pull off the Hugs die that I cut, and I don't need to save the actual word Hugs, but I am going to save all the little tiny pieces that were kind of like the negative space that you would normally toss because you're, die cutting the word Hugs out. I'm saving all those pieces to glue onto my background. Now this is probably a step that you don't need to do if gluing little tiny pieces onto a card is not your favorite thing. That's okay. You don't need to do that. You can see right here how it turns out. You can see the hug sentiment perfectly in that opening, and you definitely don't need to save all those little pieces, but I wanted to fill in the openings like where the fancy flourishes of the G are. So I'll just show you how I did that in today's process. So I'm taking my liquid adhesive, I'm gluing all the way around the Hugs opening, I'm doing the four sides, I'm going in between all those designs with my liquid adhesive, and I'll go ahead and glue this layer to my white foiled sentiment layer. I will line up the corners and make sure everything looks straight and centered, especially with my sentiment. If my cardstock on the background stuck out on one of the sides, that's okay. I could trim it. It still looks great, but I ended up getting things lined up pretty well. So now I'm going to take that liquid adhesive and I'm going to add glue to where I want to tuck in those little extra pieces. So there was a piece that cut out between the H and the U. So I grab my liquid adhesive and I'm grabbing my tool here to pick up that little piece of purple cardstock and drop that in place. Again, there's another little die cut for the inside of my U. So again, adding liquid adhesive and dropping that little piece. And I'll keep going. There's the G's and then around the S as well. I'm just adding these little pieces in, putting glue down and then using my tool to pick up the paper and placing that onto the background. If you don't really want to go through all this, you definitely don't have to, but I just think it kind of elevates and gives that dimension of color around my sentiment, really making it look like this sentiment is, coming through the background. So now that that is all done, I'll go ahead and clean up my desk. I don't need to keep that hug sentiment, but I want to start with a layout of my background. So I'm going to definitely be using that cute Christmas tree and my two little characters or kids here decorating the tree. I loved the little boy holding the gift and laughing. And of course, I have to put the cute little dog and cat and presents on the card. So once I was happy with my layout, I'll go ahead and start gluing things down. I wanted to create some dimension, so I'm going to use liquid adhesive to glue the tree and the two little kids decorating the tree. I'm using liquid glue because they are going to be further away in my scene, and therefore I can glue them directly to the background. When I get to the images that are going to be closer to you as the card receiver, I'm going to use some dimension, some foam adhesive for those. So they kind of stick up, they appear closer to you, and give a little bit more dimension and depth to the card. So again, I used liquid adhesive to glue the little girl down on the left. I glued the tree down so it's centered, and then the little boy adding an ornament to the tree on the right. And this is why I said I wish my sentiment was a little higher. I think I could have given just a little bit more dimension to the card that way, but it still turns out really adorable. I'm happy with how everything looks at the end. So now I've got some foam adhesive. This is just some foam squares from my stash, and I'm going to add them to my images. So anywhere where I'm going to be tucking images behind another item, I don't put any foam adhesive, but I do where I know it will touch the background. So I added foam adhesive to the little bone, the little gifts, my cat, the dog, and this little boy, giggling with his gift. I did find that the bone felt like it was kind of floating there in the middle of the gift, so I'm going to peel that off and I'm going to add a stocking. I'm going to use foam adhesive at the top of the stocking and then liquid adhesive at the bottom just so I can get that tucked in, and I'm going to put that in between the gifts and the cat in the gift box, so that way I can then add the bone and it doesn't look like the bone is just kind of floating there without any grounding, and then also just fills in that gap that was left from it being kind of a shorter image. With that, that finishes adding all of my cute little stamped images to the card, and now I want to bring in my Jade Shadows Dewdrops, my Sapphire Night Dewdrops, and the Matte Gold Opal Gems, which again inspired all of the colors and choices I made for this card. So I'm going to start with the Sapphire Night. I poured a few of those gems into my cute little tray here, and I'm going to use my tool with the wax tip to pick up those gems and add them around the card. It takes me a little while to figure out what I want to do. I just knew that I wanted the gems to look like they were flowing down the design of the speckled canopy background, the different cutouts. So I added a bunch of the Sapphire Night, and then I added a bunch of the Jade Shadows around the card, and I finished it off with the Matte Gold Opal Gems, and I really like how they just look like they were meant to be with that design in the background. So once I was happy with the layout and how many I had, it seems like a lot, but I just think it elevates the background. I picked them up and then used my liquid adhesive to add some glue to the background and then dropped them right back in place again with my little wax tip tool. I got an A2 card base. This is top folding, and I'm using some sturdy adhesive to add some glue to the card base, and then I'm going to go ahead and apply my card front. Do my very best not to knock any of those gems out of place. Once that is glued down to the card base, that finishes off my card. I hope you had fun with me today for the 14th of December, or 11 days till Christmas. I can't believe there's only 11 days till Christmas, but I hope you had fun making this purple and green themed Christmas card. Let me know in the comments if you have ever colored with, gems as your inspiration. I would really love to know, and enjoy the rest of the countdown, and absolutely have a wonderful holiday season.